Good afternoon, ladies. It's an honor to be here with you to share 50 Years of Bleeding, a storytelling feminist reading of Mark 5, 24 through 43 by Musa Dube. The storytelling is comprised of one, Dr. Colonial Master, 1839 to 1949, two, Dr. Struggle for Independence, 1949 to 1969, three, Dr. Independence, 1969 to 1979, and finally, A's, Mama Africa is Coming Up Behind Jesus, 1989 to 1998. I would like to share with you a little bit about Professor Musa Dube. She is a biblical scholar based at the University of Botswana. She studied the New Testament at the University of Durham, UK, in 1890, and Vanderbilt University, USA, in 1897. Her research interests include gender, post-colonial translation, and HIV and AIDS studies. She is a member of Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians, Society of Biblical Literature, and United Methodist Church. The story is based on three texts. One, an African oral tale of a young girl who is buried by her friends, but sings out from her grave, telling her story. Two, a biblical tale of bleeding woman, Mark 5, 35 through 43, who had visited many physicians until all her money was spent while she got worse. And three, the story of Africa in the past 50 years, covering the pre-colonial and colonial periods, the struggle for independence, and the neo-colonial, globalization, and AIDS periods. The story views this history through a gender lens by placing a woman in the middle of the story of Africa, both as one who defies death by continuing to sing from the many graves of her context, and as a bleeding woman who fully participates in the search for healing and survival of the African continent. Evidently, the struggle continues. Dr. Colonial Master, 1939 to 1949. Knock, knock. Who's there? It is me, cutting firewood around. Please take a message to my parents. Tell them that I am no more, for they buried me here. Well, once upon a time, there was a beautiful princess called Africa. She built her palace on the great Zimbabwe by the art of patience and endurance, cutting, carrying, and laying one little rock after another. She built her winter palace in the golden sands of Egypt by the community spirit of all of her children, who cut and pulled heavy rocks in the sand for years. She grazed her cattle on the Great Lakes of the East and plowed her fields on the sandbanks of the Nile. There she struggled and triumphed, fighting many natural disasters of flood and droughts. She showered in the waterfalls of Victoria Falls. She took walks on the seashores of the West. Africa, a tall and bouncing girl, walked freely from one end of her land to another, visiting the shrines, offering sacrifices to the divine, fighting and surviving disasters, but always bringing enough food for her household. During the day, African children played under the bright and blue sky that was graced by the unfailing sun. During the night, her children slept under the luxury roof of millions of stars in their dreams. African children laughed with the moon. When morning came, African children woke up singing with the million birds of the valley. In the mid-morning, African children went down to the river to play with the frogs. And when the sun went down, African children danced to welcome each star in the sky. And when all the stars were planted in the sky, the moon emerged to them, tells around the fire. Her brothers, Uncles, husbands, fathers spent their days tending their animals and plants, mining and carving, hunting and watching the children as they played, and always bringing the sufficient food to the household. African blossom in self-sufficiency, survival, health, and peace. But in the year of 1939, Africa woke up severely ill. She felt walls had entered into all of her body. She felt fenced, bound. Africa cried out, saying, "Take the thorn of suffering away from my flesh. Take it away." As she spoke, she began to bleed nonstop. Then Dr. Colonia Master appeared saying, "I am the healer of all diseases, but in order to heal this kind of disease, I have to take you into my hospital. I have to watch you very closely, teach you what you need to learn and what you need to know. Basically, what you need most is the medicine of civilization." Africa entered Dr. Colonia Master's hospital, and she was put to sleep with heavy medication. She slept for 10 years, lying limp. She heard the distant sound of her children's joy disappear into the air, to the air. She heard no more the voices of her brothers, uncles, fathers, and husbands, but they had disappeared into the mines, the plantation, and the farms to work for Dr. Colonia Master. But in the year 1949, Dr. Colonia Master seemed preoccupied by issues of his homeland. He no longer had enough time to treat Africa in the mornings. Picking up her clothes and still bleeding, Africa escaped into the bush. This is how she came to meet her new physician, Comrade Dr. Struggle for Independence. Dr. Struggle for Independence, 1949 to 1969. When Africa escaped from her captor, she yearned for revitalizing shower in the waterfalls of Victoria Falls. As she got closer, she heard the soothing sound of the falls. But when she arrived there, she found fenced in with a sign posted, "Victoria Falls." Victoria? Who is Victoria? And off she went to her palace in the Great Zimbabwe. But when she arrived, there she found that it too was fenced in. A porter standing by the gate said to her, "This is the home of Dr. Colonia Master. Are you one of his domestic servants? Or are you seeking to be one?" Shaking her head and still bleeding, Africa heard, or she headed to her grazing lands in the Great Lakes of the East. She wanted to find her people, her cattle, and her farms. As she came closer, she saw the beautiful valley that lay peacefully in front of her. She saw her cattle grazing in the green pastures. The memory of happy times gripped her. She ran down, but a young herdsman who looked just like one of her many children came hurriedly to meet her. "Mom," he said, "this land and these cattle belong to Dr. Colonia Master. Are you one of his domestic servants, or do you seek to be one? Are you still telling me that this very land and cattle belong to Dr. Colonia Master?" "Yes, Mom, it is so." "Then tell me, how can I get to my farms along the fertile banks of the Nile and to my winter home in the golden sands of Egypt?" "Your farms? Along the Nile?" "Well, there is this missionary road to the north." Africa turned to the north. As she came close to the Nile, the sweet smell of fertile sandbanks tingled her nose, and the memory of happy times gripped her, and she began to run with excitement. But as she was running, she brought to a sudden stop by a fence with a large sign announcing in bold letters, "No trespassing." This territory belonged to Dr. Colonia Master. Africa turned back towards the rocks of Sotaleo in the south, where she decided to express her fears in a painting. But there too, a porter met her by the gate, declaring, "Mom, Black people are not allowed in this resort area. Are you one of Dr. Colonial Master's domestic servants, or do you want to be one? Shocked, shaken, and still bleeding, Africa turned towards the west. The sun was settling when she began to cut firewood in the rocky and barren land where she found herself. The pain of the capture of her children, people, land, and property is excruciating. Africa cried out from anguish, saying, "Take this thorn away from my body, take it away." Just then a voice broke her despair. She's singing and saying the great things and desire in her African language. Sieged by anger, Africa called out, "Tulizid come," which means, "Little girl, arise." And behold, the bellies of the earth opened. She jumped out. She was followed by all the beloved old women and men. These people from Botswana, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. And as she sang, the ground shook and broke open again. And there came from the ground the many handsome sons and daughters of Africa, Kwame, Winnie, and Nelson Mandela, and many others. There was much joy and weeping as they saw each other again, and after such a long time, they told each other the stories of how Dr. Colonial Master had captured and confined them. Yet many more daughters and sons were missing or dead. Africa wept. She wept for the lost children of her womb. Seeing her tears, all the able-bodied young adults said, "We cannot live like this. We have to fight for our liberation." Many of her children who lived in North America was also saying, "Back to Africa. Harambee. Africa shall be free." Just then, the booming voice of Mubu, yet to be born, was heard shouting from the future, "Do something to facilitate change in Africa. Let it be done before dawn." And the children of Africa rose and said, "We must go out and fight Dr. Colonial Master. We must recapture all that belongs to us. It is the only solution." "Do you want to leave me again?" Africa asked Kwame, her firstborn son, turned to her and said, "Mama, Africa, stay right here in this infertile land with the young children and the old people. Take care of them while we fight for independence. It is the struggle for independence that will give you healing. It is the only solution to your suffering." And her firstborn son, tall and regal, her last-born son, tall and regal, Nelson Mandela, said, "Mama, Africa, the struggle is my life, for my freedom and that of my people cannot be separated." From that day on, Africa became Mama Africa, the strong Black woman who carries us all on her back, shaken and still bleeding. Mama Africa was left in the barren, crowded lands to plow and fend to her young children, old people, and all those who were struggling in the guerrilla warfare for independence. For many years, she took care of everyone to ensure that independence would come to heal the land and all the people. Guns would sound, bombs would explode, and the heart would shudder in fear during the night. And many more of her boys and girls would disappear and join the shouts of the comrades of the struggle for independence, while many others were forced to work in the farms, plantations, and mines of Dr. Colonial Master. Mama Africa herself labored both in the farms of Dr. Colonial Master and in her own fields, She produced food for those at home and for those at war, for the oppressed and for the oppressor. The years of the struggles dragged on. Blood flowed from her body until all the rivers of Africa were red and the land began to stink and the stench of death. That is when Mama Africa stood up and shouted, "Take this thorn away from my body, take it away." Just then a horn sounded and liberty was announced throughout the land. Viva! Victory was certain, and that is how Mama Africa came to meet her new physician, Dr. Independence. Dr. Independence, 1969 to 1979. Weak and still bleeding, the heart of Mama Africa rejoiced in hope. Independence was here. Power to the people. Healing was certain. She rejoiced at the prospect of getting back all her children again, getting back her power, her honor, and her share in the struggle for independence. Mama Africa was ready for the healing of her own body. Indeed, her sons and daughters did arrive in the crowded villages singing songs of victory. Drums were sounded. They were dancing. They were singing. There was joy. She sang along and danced along. Thanksgiving were offered to the divine. Where the day ended, her songs pulled away, back to the towns and cities, back to sleep in the fortresses built by Dr. Colonial Master. Mama Africa and her daughters were left in the rocky, crowded, and buried lands to produce food for those in town and in the villages. Her grazing land, her fields, her palaces, her caves did not return to her. Plantations produced the crops that we need to export. Stay where you are and produce food for the nation, Mama Africa. Most of her daughters who were in the struggle for independence were also left at home alongside their mother. Weak and still bleeding, Mama Africa struggled and toiled in the hospital of Dr. Independence. Again, there were wars. Now the sons of Mama Africa was fighting among themselves. Guns and bombs exploded. Young boys and girls disappeared. Her children dodged death or died in the very air they breathed. Young children took arms, went to war, and were killed. The genocide of Rwanda claimed multitudes. Mama Africa, Somalia, children starved until they were skeleton bones, where warlords made war, not love. Landmines were planted, and playing boys and girls lost their limbs and legs until they learned how not to play. Mama Africa could not plant any more crops, for the fields had already been planted with mine. She could not walk freely again, for her body was full of explosives. She was confined, afraid to set one foot outside of her yard, lest she stepped on mine. Once more, she was buried in a hole. But one day she heard in the distance the sound of someone chopping, and she cried out in her native language for help. And indeed, help came. International organizations arrived. Church organizations arrived to facilitate reconciliation. International financial bodies arrived to lend money. International donors were ready to give aid to resuscitate the devastated economies. Mama Africa were ready for a much needed rest. This is how she met a new physician, Dr. Neo-colonialism, who also goes by the name Dr. Global Village. AIDS. Mama Africa is coming up behind Jesus, 1989 to 1998. Still bleeding and searching for healing. Mama Africa is struck by a new disease, HIV/AIDS. She is now a nurse. She runs home-based care centers for her dying children and people. She washes them, feeds them, holds them in her arms and rocks them, singing a little song while she awaits their death. And when they finally die, she rises to close her eyes, to wrap them and bury them. Mama bears, or she bears in her own flesh, the wounds of their suffering. And they die in her loving arms. Mama Africa was burying this morning and this afternoon, and she will bury again. And tomorrow morning, she will put away yet another of her precious gems. And in the afternoon, she will bury again. At this very moment, Mama Africa is nursing a sister, an uncle, a brother with one hand. And with her other hand, she is holding a dying child and feeding many orphans. She has closed many homes and villages, and she will close many more. Mama Africa is once more confined, caring for the sick and dying. Just a few minutes ago, she was sitting here in her home, feeling like a motherless child, when she heard a crowd in the distance streaming into Botswana in an African language, and when she called out, "Who is there? Who is there?" She was told, Jesus Christ, the healer of all diseases, is passing by. She heard that Jesus is on his way to heal a little girl who is already dead, the daughter of Jairus. Mama Africa is standing up. She is not talking. She is not asking. She is not offering any more money, but none is left. Mama Africa is coming behind Jesus. She is pushing through a strong human barricade of crowds. Weak and still bleeding, but determined, she is stretching out her hands. If only she can touch the garments of Jesus Christ. Thank you.